Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name's Geoff Cox. I'm Design Director with RSVP Design. I'm speaking to you from Paisley in Scotland, and may I welcome you to this webinar, which is titled Be Future Ready, and it features one of RSVP's larger exercises called Top Priority. Last week, as I record this, last week was Learning at Work Week, and the Campaign for Learning, who organised that, broke down the theme of shaping the future, which was their title for this work, into future open, future ready, and future active. Now, we've chosen as experiential learning specialists to focus on the future ready part of that, although to be honest, we could have used top priority to address future open, i.e. being open to learning, to being future ready, which is where we're putting the focus, or to be future active, in that all RSVP tools get people actively involved in their own learning. What I'm going to do is to show you some slides which support this presentation. It's easier probably to show you some pictures of the exercise in action, rather than just look at my face for 30 minutes or so. So if you'll just excuse me, what I'm going to do is to share my screen. Hopefully that you can see that, and what this first slide describes is the task that we were given when this exercise was first commissioned. The commission came from a Silicon Valley company who said that what they wanted was an exercise that looked in depth at effective collaboration in highly interdependent working environments. Now, this is going back some time, and it was at a time when the idea of matrix working was really getting some traction, particularly in high-tech companies. And what they were interested in doing is, what are the kind of behaviours and attitudes that people need to play an active role in a matrix organisation, or any organisation which is organised to be highly interdependent. So we designed top priority, and the initial run out was at very senior levels inside of the organisation. In fact, I remember the first delivery was the country heads for every country in Europe, and what was described to me in advance of this particular piece of delivery was that the way people grab attention in this organisation is by shouting loud, and the people who shout loudest may not warrant the priority of attention. So what we need to do is to find a different way of allocating priority across working environments, particularly these highly interdependent working environments. So the initial design and any subsequent delivery has been designed to address a particular set of outcomes. So, as I've alluded to already, developing the behaviours and attitudes required to operate effectively in multi-team, multitask working environments. And from that, if I read that description, I'd know that what we were talking about isn't a simple business game. It's something that moves a bit further along that design spectrum towards simulation. So what we have is a relatively loose but more or less accurate representation of a multi-team, multitask working environment, which can be used as a business simulation. What we're also looking at is the building the ability to rapidly and accurately formulate plans that will respond to complex working situations. Again, very much a characteristic of a simulation. Understanding how to efficiently collect and process information that allows plans to be responsive to events. So those two taken together, the second and third of those learning outcomes, give us a situation where we're looking for people to rapidly develop a plan and then have the information flows which allow them to continually review that plan and revise it as necessary depending on events. The fourth learning outcome is developing skills at communicating effectively in complex and fast-moving situations. For a relatively short exercise, and I'll come back to the time that we take to run top priority later in this presentation, but in a relatively short period there's an awful lot happens, and the skill of communicating in those complex and fast moving situations is something that top priority lends itself to very effectively. And finally, in terms of learning outcome, practicing the development of leadership structures and approaches that will respond to all of the above. I often say that top priority is an excellent exercise for determining how leadership is viewed within an organization. Not the leadership. This is not about the characters who find themselves in leadership situations. It's more about how is the function of leadership viewed inside of this organization. In that there's an awful lot of opportunity for people to make mistakes and to learn fantastic lessons inside of top priority, and leadership is by no means the least of the areas we'll be learning in. So if that's the learning outcomes that top priority is set up to look at, what I'll move on to now is what exactly is top priority. So it's a highly experiential modular exercise that can be configured by the user to include between 3 and 6 discrete tasks. When you open the box that top priority arrives in, you'll find it has 6 discrete tasks. But we encourage people to think about the deployment of the exercise and make their own decisions about the number of those tasks that they use, depending on the number of people that they have. So it can be ideally configured to involve between 12 and 36 people. You could go above that if you include people who are observers of specific working groups or individuals. You could go to the lower end of that. I've done this with single figures, but it really works most effectively between 12 and 36 people involved. The materials and a full facilitation guide are supplied to allow a setup that includes all of the tasks that are listed there. And again, what we encourage people to do is to make decisions, and I'll offer you a little bit of support in doing that later in this webinar. But all of those exercises come bundled inside of top priority. Each task must be completed to a high standard within a 90-minute time period. So what we're looking for is 100% success, so that if you provide a group with the whole 6 tasks, what you're looking for them to do is to complete the tasks within a 90-minute time period. And the high standard, that does require the facilitator who is running the exercise to make some value judgments about the quality of performance, to say, yes, I agree that that is completed to a high standard, or no, that's not completed to a high standard. So as a facilitator, you need to be prepared to step into that more judgmental role than a facilitator might normally be expected to occupy. The way we organise people inside of the exercise is that each participant is part of a management team who have specific responsibility for the successful delivery of one of the tasks, so that anyone as part of the exercise will be, for instance, part of the webmaster management team or the Polydron management team, workstations management team, etc., so that they know which task it's their specific responsibility to deliver. And if you look at those last two points that I've put up there, each task must be completed. So we're looking for the organisation to complete all of the tasks that they're asked to do. But each participant is part of the management team with specific responsibility for one of the tasks. So one area of learning here is learning to balance team goals and organisation goals, and look at the loyalties and priorities that exist inside a situation where you have a responsibility to each one of those goal sets. Each participant has material contribution to make to multiple tasks. This is one of the key parts of the top priority, in that on entering the exercise, each participant is allocated their particular personal stock of components. And if you're running the top priority with, say, the whole 6 tasks involved, each participant may have a contribution to make to 4 or 5 of those tasks. And the prioritization in the title, the top priority, means at what point are you contributing to any particular task, and how do you manage your time within the exercise to make decisions about, at this point in time, where should I be, have my attention, which of these tasks? Because obviously, if somebody is trying to spread themselves across all 4 or 5 tasks that they are contributing towards, it's unlikely to be a successful task or successful contribution. And one of the key roles for the facilitator is just ensuring that each participant manages these resources that have been allocated to them in a way that means that this exercise doesn't become just a pure barter exercise. It'd be very easy to shortcut the learning in top priority, that if at the start of the exercise everybody just gave away what each of the management teams needs. So what we say is, you hang on to your materials until you materially contribute them into one of the tasks. So a little bit more about the 6 tasks that are available to use. I've said what they are, and what I'm going to do is to go through each one of those in turn. But before I do, if you just take a look at that picture that I've got up on the screen there now, it gives you some sense of the kind of materials that each individual would be allocated. So they may have some of the kind of larger wooden components. They may have components made of rope and metal or plastic. They have paperwork that relates to the tasks that they need to do. So there's a lot of materials that need managing, both by the facilitator and by the group once they start working on this task. So let's go to Webmaster first of all. And Webmaster is one of the largest scale tasks. And the materials, there are 29 or 20. You can choose, depending on the size of your group, whether to work Webmaster with 20 components in play or 29 components in play. And the components, you see them laid on the floor there. What they are is rope and clips that make up a construction which is laid out on the floor there. It's a large scale construction. Now, if you're allocating, say, 29 pieces, it could be that 29 people out of your group have one piece to contribute to Webmaster. And obviously that means as Webmaster takes probably a minimum of 20 minutes to complete, what it means is that 29 people are going to be unable to contribute to any of the other tasks during the construction of Webmaster. Now, what that means is that the other groups need to decide what they can achieve, so that if you're not involved in Webmaster, what else can you achieve on the other tasks, rather than the whole organisation coming to a standstill because a large proportion of the people are involved in this particular task. So the prioritization is about what can you simultaneously be achieving on each of these tasks. It's a very interesting exercise, as are all of the tasks that we give people within top priority, and it's one that doesn't come easy. It takes an awful lot of trial and error problem solving, which eats up time. And as top priority, as we've said, operating against the clock, it makes it quite a challenge to be working with this. The second task is a much simpler one, and you can see where these two gentlemen have their hands on a three-dimensional plastic construction. And what this is a set of two-dimensional plastic shapes which snap together and then can be wrapped around to make a three-dimensional polyhedron that looks a little bit like a football. And interestingly, I've already described Webmaster as occupying a lot of people for a lot of time. This is at the other end of the involvement spectrum, in that probably this task probably will only take 10 minutes. So if you have 6 people in the Polygon management team, and they can work effectively and get this finished in 10 or 15 minutes, what do they do with the rest of their 90 minutes? And this is always an interesting learning area. Do they go and volunteer to work with other groups, in which case are the other groups who've already got started on their tasks, are the other groups prepared to give them access to what's going on and actually gainfully employ them? Or do these people go and have a cup of coffee or read their email? What do they do when their task is delivered inside of this multi-team, multitask environment? So it's one of the shorter tasks. And where Webmaster might relate to one of the major production tasks of an organization, a client organization, Polygon is very much an administration task, in that what it needs is each individual to make their contribution to a process which can be finished by a small number of people. So if you were looking for an analogy inside of an organization, you may think about something administrative. Workstations is a paper-based exercise. It involves 30 pieces of information that are written onto 30 different cards, which are distributed across the participant group, and the workstations management team need to pull together that information in order to solve or to answer some questions that are embedded within that information. So it's a little, if you're looking for the organisation analogy, what this would be is any kind of poll or survey where information is being collected across the organisation. Spot check is another interesting exercise, and this one is representative of any kind of task which requires people to go outside of the organisation and bring back information. So the kind of organisation analogy might be something like benchmarking against a client or a competitor. Or a supply organisation, or it might be going to central repositories of information, such as technical libraries, that kind of thing, and bringing back information in order to perform a task. Interestingly, in spot check, there is this strong possibility that the information that people bring back into the organisation may be contradictory, so that there is some problem solving and reconciliation of that situation that needs to be done. And interestingly, with spot check, the group get one chance at getting this right, so the attention to detail needs to be spot on. Pantones, very pretty picture there of the completed Pantones situation. What this is a set of cubes which represent the range of colours in the Pantone system. This again is about collecting data and information about what people hold inside of your organisation. So who is holding what coloured cube, and who has the connecting rods that bring them together. And two different ways of doing this. One is visually, which may appeal to some people, but there are also numbers printed on these cubes so that people can work numerically, or it may be a combination. So a lot of the learning here is about settling on which system you're going to use within this particular exercise to complete this final construction, because as you'll see, there's a fair big degree of complexity there. So what we don't want is people doing this twice. So it has to be done accurate, or the information gathered needs to be done accurately so that we can quickly assemble this. The final, the sixth exercise here is another large-scale construction task. This is a little bit like Webmaster. It involves a lot of people for a considerable period of time. This is about 15 people. So that if you provide an organisation, and I might make this choice with something like a manufacturing organisation, I might choose to run Webmaster and Sequencer simultaneously within top priority. So make sure that they're two of the 6 tasks, or 2 of the tasks that I choose from the 6 to use. In that, what's inevitably would happen is that some people would have a contribution to make to Webmaster and to Sequencer, both of which take a lot of time. So how do you make the choice about which priority to give these 2 tasks? So that's a little bit about the tasks that we're we're using inside of top priority. So what I'll do is to give you a quick rundown about the ideal time structure. Now it says on our notes that this is a 90-minute exercise, but please note that that is 90 minutes of working time. And what I've given you here is an ideal time structure. So if I'm programming top priority into a piece of delivery, this is the kind of time structure I'd be looking to dedicate to it. First of all, before I even get the group into the room, I'd be looking for something like 15 minutes, a facilitated setup time. Excuse me, I've already described to you the need to have an individualized supply of materials that go to each individual. Now that needs to be set up. So if you're working with a full 36 people, there's 36 individual material piles that need to be made up using the notes that are in the facilitator guide. That takes a little bit of time, and what I recommend is if you can get more than one pair of hands doing this, it's really valuable. So after that 15 minutes of setup time, what we'll be looking to do is invite the group into the room. What I tend to do is invite them in management teams. So if I've got 6 management teams, invite them in by team, give them the paperwork that they need to read to understand their particular management task, and making sure that each individual has their materials and that they understand that they need to hold on to those materials rather than just giving them away. Now all of this is covered very comprehensively in the facilitator guide, so I'm not going into it in any more detail now. But then what we do is to set the group away working. Now, what I do before I start them working is make sure they know what the time structure of this is. The ideal time structure I've given you here involves stopping the clock after 10 minutes for a 10-minute after 45 minutes for a 10-minute mid-exercise review. I just find that really helps to support and scaffold the learning. So what I tell the group on that I'm going to start the clock, they're going to have 45 minutes of working time. We're then going to take a 10-minute mid-exercise review and then a further 45 minutes, but everything needs to be complete at the end of that 90 minutes of working time. Kind of thing that I'd expect to see in the first 45 minutes is a lot of chaos. People try to kind of barter time. They're not allowed to barter materials, but people tend to say things like, if you come over and make your contribution to my exercise, then I'll come across to yours, so that you get multiple conversations like that happening, which means that there's very little by way of overview organization, very little leadership, and that's pretty much what we're looking for, because as we've not imposed a leadership structure on the group, we're looking for them to recognize the need for a leadership structure and design that in so that they can operate in a much more considered way. But that does eat up clock time. So the 10-minute mid-exercise review, I very often find myself saying, okay, we've had 50% of the working time and we only have 1 or 2. So, that might be a kind of maximum of 30% of the tasks complete, yet 50% of the time has gone. So what we're going to do differently in the second 45 minutes, and that tends to focus the attention on what changes do the group want to make in the way that they're working. So having run that and very strictly controlled and left that at 10 minutes, we then move into the second 45 minutes of working time, when I'd hope that the changes that are made in the mid-exercise review result in a much more efficient way of working, or a decision from whatever leadership the group have imposed that perhaps they won't be able to get all of these exercises done. They may not be able to get all 6 tasks done. So which one gets dropped, and how do the leaders make that okay with the groups, particularly the management team, for the exercise which isn't going to get done? Now, as you can hear from that, the chances are that there's an awful lot to talk about after this exercise. So the debrief, I'd never have less than 30 minutes to debrief top priority. And usually I'll take a lot longer than that. As I've said, I would minimum allow 3 hours, or better still, a full half day to top priority, so that what we can do is to maximize the learning that we can pull out of top priority. And there is a lot of learning, and what we always encourage users of top priority to do is be very, very clear about why you're using this exercise. Otherwise, you just have too much learning, and unless you are selective about what learning you're looking to achieve, it's very difficult to decide on what to look at. So when it comes to the debrief, it would very largely depend on my reason for using it. So if I was looking at the way a group organise themselves to complete a task, so I may use this inside of a vertical slice of an organisation, or a diagonal slice, to look at how tasks are achieved inside of the client organisation, because what I'm obviously looking to do in the debrief is take the learning from the exercise and apply it back into the client organisation. It might also be for junior managers who we're looking at the effect of management on a fairly chaotic situation, to say, well, what effect does management have? So the kind of questions in a task-focused debrief that I might ask might be, how effectively did you manage the time and resources in the exercise? There is a lot of resources to be managed, and resources, both material and people, inside of the exercise. So I might dig deeper into that and say things like, was everybody fully occupied all of the time in the exercise? Particularly if a group haven't completed all of this, was there time, or were there times inside of the exercise where people were at loose ends, just didn't know what to do? How effectively did you prioritize tasks? That's both within the management team and inside of the whole organization. I might actually choose to start this debrief in management teams and ask the management teams to answer these questions first of all and report back, and then perhaps pose the same or very similar questions to the whole group. But we're also looking for some level of responsiveness here. So how did you develop and modify your plan as the exercise progressed? So where did the initial plan come from? Did you have enough information to hand in order to develop a good plan at that stage? How did you acquire more information? What systems did you set up to get information to whatever decision-making body you've set up inside of there? And how does that modify the plan? Obviously, how was the plan communicated is a good further question on the back of that. So that would be a task-focused debrief. I've already said that I really like using top priority as a leadership exercise. So the kind of questions I might be asking here are, what evidence was there of leadership behaviour during the exercise? So, the working word there in that sentence is evidence. So what this isn't a yes, no, was there evidence of leadership behaviour, but it's what evidence. So I'm asking for the group to tell me what leadership behaviour they were seeing or hearing during the exercise. Who took on leadership roles? How did this happen? Did it happen by accident? You just happened to be in the right place at the right time, or the wrong place at the wrong time, in order to be given the leadership roles? Or was it somebody got so frustrated that they stood on a chair and said, "We need to get this organised, guys"? Or was it, "These are the people that we know will do a good job of being leaders. Let's give them the job"? Describe the ways in which the style of leadership changed at different times in the exercise and what provoked these changes. Very often that the first model of leadership that is put in place in top priority is a very consultative way of leading. What they find is, because this is against the clock, that becomes very top heavy and difficult to manage because there's just too much consultation to be done. So it may need to move to a much more didactic, much more directive sort of leadership. And what provoked these changes? As I say, it's a good way of finding out the way leadership is viewed in your working group, and the extent to which leadership as a function is valued inside of that organisation, which may be a fairly salutary lesson for anybody working in HR in these organisations, to suddenly find that the leadership isn't viewed as particularly necessary and may actually get in the way of working effectively, which suggests perhaps further development work required. Finally, and leading on from that, it's the accountability-focused debrief. So very quickly, did people remain accountable for their components and contribution to the exercise? Again, what evidence? So, to what extent did people take it? Were held themselves to account for their contribution and the management of the components they were given. And whenever operating principles have been communicated to them by the leadership that emerges during the exercise, were they communicated and followed? So as I've suggested, depending on the what learning you're looking for out of top priorities, a very, very versatile exercise. We find ourselves talking to clients a lot about this exercise, about the kind of fine tailoring. It's not a difficult exercise conceptually, but actually tailoring it to fit to your client organisation, we recognise often does need a bit of support, and we're always here to help people to do that. Now, what I'm going to do is to move back to you looking at my face, because that's pretty much everything that I want to say to you. So I'm just reading one of the questions that's come up there. The question that's just been posed to me is what kinds of questions you find useful in the 10-minute mid-exercise review. What are the typical changes in behaviour after that? What I'd say is it's very much about leadership and organisation. So what I'm looking to do is for the group to have a chance to acknowledge that what's happened in the first 45 minutes has been rather chaotic and hasn't been very effective or efficient. So what I'm looking for them to do is to recognise that fact and to suggest what could be done differently in the second 45 minutes, which is going to be more efficient and effective. Now, if the group haven't made moves towards creating a leadership structure for across the whole exercise. What I'd be very strongly doing is leading them towards that. And the kind of question there would be, do you think it would be advantageous to have a leader or a leadership structure in here with a very strong lead towards, yes, you should be doing that. And also the type of leadership, in that if very often what happens is the groups will look at representative leadership. So let's send one person from each of the 6 management teams. They become a committee of leaders. And that is a very inefficient way of working in a situation where it's against the clock, and it really needs 1 or 2 people to take an overall strategic leadership role. The leaders from each of the management team can fulfill an operation leadership role, but it really does need somebody making the prioritization decisions, particularly if time gets tight and potentially we need to drop some of the exercises. The changes I'd look to see is a much more efficient, much more organized second half of the exercise. So thank you for that question. Second question that I've got here is, can you provide online support for first-time use or application for new users? Absolutely. Top priority is the exercise that I spend most of my dedicated online support time focused on. So it tends to be people who have decided that top priority is the right exercise for them, but there are particular characteristics of the deployment. It may be a client organization. If they're a consultant, it may be a particular work group inside of an organization. So what we tend to do is to talk through what is the learning that the client is looking to gain from this particular use of top priority, and then I can make some suggestions about, do we work all 6 exercises? Do we reduce the number of tasks we use? If we're going to reduce the number of tasks, which ones are the appropriate ones to draw out the learning that we're talking about. We'll also talk about the specific review questions, both at midterm and at the end of the exercise, which will draw out the learning. So very much those conversations are available to people who've bought top priority, and very much they tend to be about specific uses. Now, what I find is that once a client has used top priority once with a particular group, they have enough of a handle on the particular adaptation of the exercise to specific groups to be able to do it themselves. And then often it's just an email exchange to say, can you give me some questions that'll help me with this, or this is what I'm thinking about doing by way of a setup for top priority. Will it fit? So it becomes something that people very quickly assimilate as facilitators and understand, and I think to a very large extent enjoy using. It's not the kind of exercise where you're rushed off your feet as a facilitator. A lot of your work is done prior to starting the exercise in the setup, which gives you the luxury of being able to let the exercise run itself, let the group manage themselves, and you just focus on what you should be doing as a facilitator, which is observing the group working and tailoring the questions that you're going to use in the 2 review slots at the middle and the end of the exercise. Very quickly, another question here. Is it possible to break the exercise into 2 parts? Say do it over 2 workshops of 90 minutes rather than one of 3 hours? Absolutely, it would be. You might lose a little bit of momentum. In that, what you'd need to do is to make sure that you knew exactly where the group had got to, because if you're going to break this in the middle, you're going to have a lot of half complete tasks. So what you need to do is to be able to store those half complete tasks ready for the group to move in and pick them up again. So it's possible. It's a difficult thing to administer, in that you need a fair bit of storage space and a lot of photographs of kind of where people got to in this exercise. So my advice is, if you possibly can, run it as a single session. It is possible to split it, but it wouldn't be my advice. It wouldn't be my preferred way of working, in that it's an exercise that builds up to a crescendo as people are trying desperately to get the last couple of tasks done within the 90-minute working period, and you lose a little bit of that theatre as people work towards the time when the clock is going to stop. Okay, so thank you very much for your attention, and for those really strong questions that came through there. As I've said, this is about getting your organisation future ready. In that, very much what I've described to you is a rehearsal space. It's a way of getting the group to rehearse the attitudes and behaviours, the skills, the organisation, the prioritisation, all of the kind of components that go into a group in future ready, so that changes in the operating environment or the organisation can be accommodated rapidly, so that you're not having downtime because of even relatively minor organisational changes are hijacking your working organisation. So thanks very much indeed. I hope you've got what you need from this. Any questions that you have, please feel free to come back to us via our website. We will get back to you, answer any questions or queries that you have about top priority or any of the other RSVP experiential learning tools. Thank you.